Ash Over the Dead City, Part 1. Shram didn't remember his name before the zone. Not that it mattered. The past had faded, bleached like an old photograph in the sun, leaving only that rough scar across his left cheek, an eternal reminder of his first brutal lesson in survival. He was a part of the zone, and the zone was a part of him. A loner, seeking neither brotherhood nor glory, only a path forward, through anomalies and mutants, towards another hazy goal that allowed him not to think about what was left behind in the big land. This time, his path led to the Dead City, not to Pripyat itself, which had been trodden far and wide by stalkers and military alike, but to one of its forgotten satellite suburbs, the settlement of Yanov, which, after another emission, had turned into a veritable anomalous cesspool. It was said that there, in the ruins of the old train station, one could find a unique artifact, the Phantom. Legend had it that the Phantom offered neither protection nor healing, but was capable of temporarily rendering its wearer invisible not only to the human eye, but also to most mutants. For a loner like Shram, such a find could be priceless. The road to Yanov was not an easy one. Shram moved at night, avoiding patrols and large concentrations of mutants. He spent his days in hideouts abandoned collectors, basements of ruined houses, in dense thickets of radioactive bushes. His gear was old but reliable: a worn Zarya jumpsuit, a battered AKM, and a trusty anomaly detector that had saved his life more than once. Approaching the Dead City, the zone became particularly hostile. The air was heavy, saturated with dust and some acrid chemical smell. The sky was overcast with brown clouds from which from time to time fine ash-like snow fell, radioactive precipitation that made his throat raw and his eyes water. The Geiger counter clicked almost incessantly. Yanov greeted him with dead silence. Ruined 5-story buildings with empty eye sockets for windows, rusty skeletons of cars on overgrown streets, children's swings creaking in the wind like a lament for a departed life. And everywhere that strange gray ash, covering the ground, houses, trees, as if someone gigantic had sifted it over the city. Shram knew the silence was deceptive. The Dead City was home to many creatures. He had seen fresh bloodsucker tracks near a ruined shop, heard the distant guttural howl of a pseudo-giant. But his target was the train station. The station building was a depressing sight. A partially collapsed roof, broken windows, walls covered in cracks and graffiti left by unknown daredevils or madmen. The main entrance was blocked, but Shram found a side one through the former baggage claim area. Inside the station, an oppressive gloom reigned, permeated by the smell of dampness, decaying organic matter, and something else, metallic, like fresh blood. Shram switched on his headlamp. The beam snatched decaying posters on the walls, overturned benches, and a thick layer of that same gray ash on the floor from the darkness, which here, in an enclosed space, lay especially thick, like snowdrifts. He moved deeper, towards the main waiting hall where, according to rumors, the Phantom most often materialized. His artifact detector was still silent, but the tension mounted with every step. Too quiet, even for the Dead City. Suddenly, ahead, at the far end of the hall, a shadow flickered. Shram instantly raised his rifle, but the shadow disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, slipping behind one of the massive columns supporting the vaulted ceiling. Human? Or something worse? "Who's there?" Shram called out hoarsely, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the echoing silence. The only answer was the rustle of ash falling from the ceiling. Shram moved forward slowly, rifle at the ready. He circled the column. Empty, but there were fresh tracks in the ash. Not mutant. Human. Someone had been here very recently, or was still here. He scanned the hall intently. The pitch-black corners, untouched by his headlamp's beam, seemed to hide dozens of eyes watching him. This was not a place one wanted to be alone. And then his artifact detector came alive, emitting a long, melodious beep. The signal was faint, but it was there. The phantom was somewhere nearby. The beam of his headlamp darted around the hall. The signal grew stronger when he pointed it towards the old ticket booths, barred with rusty grates. Shram approached. Behind one of the grates, in the dark opening of a ticket window, he saw a faint, shimmering glow. That was it. He was already reaching out to try and bend the bars when a sharp, metallic click sounded from behind, the sound of a bolt being chambered. "Don't move, Stalker, and raise your hands slowly," a cold, confident voice commanded. Shram froze. He slowly raised his hands, not turning around. Judging by the voice, there were at least two of them, and they had snuck up on him stealthily, while he was preoccupied with the artifact. The damned ash had muffled their steps. "Who are you?" Shram asked calmly, trying to determine from the intonation whether he was dealing with common looters who could be scared off or bought off, or someone more serious. "Those who don't like people snooping around our territory," the same voice replied. "Turn around." Slowly. Shram turned. 3 men stood before him. 2 were in heavy, military-grade exoskeletons, the rifles aimed at him. The third, obviously their commander, wore a modified, dark-colored Siva suit, his face hidden beneath a tactical helmet with a lowered visor. On his chest was a patch of black scorpion against a background of crossed lightning bolts. Storm Heralds, one of the most dangerous and well-equipped factions in the zone, known for their brutality and for not taking prisoners. Rumor had it they worked for someone very influential beyond the perimeter. Well, Shram himself graces us with his presence," the Storm Heralds' commander sneered, his voice distorted by the helmet's modulator. "Heard about your talents. Decided to look for the Phantom, eh, loner?" "And what if I did?" Shram tried to speak calmly, though the situation couldn't be worse. Against 3 men in exoskeletons, he stood no chance. "Then the Phantom is ours," the commander cut him off. "Just like everything else in this sector, we're not here to share." One of the soldiers in an exoskeleton stepped forward and roughly snatched the rifle from Shram's hands. "What do we do with him, Cap?" he asked. "Bury him right here? Plenty of ash. No one will ever find him." "Not so fast, Grom." The commander slowly circled Shram, looking him over like a rare beast. "Such an experienced stalker could be useful to us. I have a little job for him, if of course he wants to breathe this charming Dead City air a little longer." Shram remained silent, waiting. He knew bartering with the Storm Heralds was pointless. If they decided to use him, they would use him. The only question was what price he would have to pay. "You see, Shram," the Cap continued, stopping in front of him, "we're not just here for artifacts, we have a more specific interest. In this city, or rather beneath it, there's an old government bunker. Very old, from the Cold War era. We believe something very valuable to our employers is preserved there. The problem is, the entrance to the bunker is protected by a cunning security system based on anomalous fields. Our technicians can't bypass it, but a stalker with your reputation and your knack for anomalies, perhaps he can." He paused, letting Shram consider what he'd said. "You'll lead us into this bunker, disable their defenses, and we'll spare your life, and even share a small fraction of what we find. Or we'll let you go on your merry way, with the Phantom in your pocket if you want it so badly. How does that sound, eh, Shram?" Shram looked into the dark slits of the Cap's helmet. He understood he had no choice. To refuse meant to die here and now. To agree meant becoming a pawn in someone else's dangerous game, one he might not survive. But it was a chance, a small, ghostly chance, but a chance nonetheless. "And if I can't bypass your defenses?" he asked. "Then you'll become a very useful bag of bones for us to leave for the local fauna to feast on," the Cap replied without a hint of a smile. "So, is it a deal?" Shram nodded slowly. "It is." "Excellent." The Cap clapped him on the shoulder. "Grom, give him back his pea shooter. Just take out the ammo. We don't need any surprises. And now, Shram, show us the way to this phantom of yours. Since we're here, might as well not leave empty-handed. And then we'll get down to real business." Shram understood he had just been dragged into a deadly venture. But he also understood that as long as the Storm Heralds needed him, he was alive. And that meant he had time. Time to find a way to change the rules of this game, or at least to survive it. He turned to the ticket window, where the phantom still shimmered. Now, this artifact seemed to him less like a coveted prize, and more like bait he had so foolishly fallen for. The ash over the dead city continued to fall, covering tracks and concealing secrets, and one of those secrets was now directly linked to Shram. Part 2. Descent into the Inferno. The bars of the ticket window yielded reluctantly, with a screech that made the Storm Heralds nervously raise their weapons. Shram, working with a crowbar under the Cap's intense gaze, finally bent enough bars to slip his hand through. The phantom lay on a dusty shelf, a small, irregularly shaped crystal, dimly shimmering from within with a bluish light. When Shram picked it up, the artifact felt unexpectedly cold, like a piece of ice, and a barely perceptible vibration emanated from it. "Here, let me see that." Grom, one of the soldiers in an exoskeleton, unceremoniously snatched the artifact from his hand. He turned the phantom over in front of his helmet, then stuck it into a special container on his belt. "Nothing special to look at. We'll check how it works later." The Cap impatiently waved his hand. "Enough fiddling. We have more important business. Shram, you said you know where to find this bunker. Lead the way." Shram nodded. He had indeed heard tales from old stalkers about an abandoned government facility somewhere beneath Yanov, but had never paid them much mind. Now, however, these fragmented pieces of information could save his life, or, conversely, seal his fate. "It's not here at the station," Shram said. "We need to go to the old depot north of here. There, if the rumors are true, there's a camouflaged entrance to technical tunnels that lead to it." "Then, what are we waiting for?" The Cap nudged him in the back with the barrel of his rifle. "Move it, guide. And remember, one wrong step, one attempt to deceive us, and your problems in the zone will end very quickly." They left the station building the same way they had entered. The ashen snow still fell monotonously from the sky, covering the ground in a gray shroud. The dead city was silent, but this silence was filled with an invisible threat. Shram felt eyes watching him from the empty windows, heard rustlings in the ruins that could have been the wind or lurking mutants. But the Storm Heralds walked confidently, their exoskeletons emitting a dull, mechanical clang with each step, which seemed to scare away all living things in the vicinity, or, on the contrary, attract them. The journey to the depot took about an hour. It was another huge, dilapidated building, with gaping holes in the walls and a collapsed roof. Inside, among the rusty skeletons of locomotives and wagons, gloom and desolation reigned. "Where's your entrance?" the Cap asked, stopping in the middle of a huge workshop. Shram pointed to the far wall, where a collapsed section of masonry was visible. "There. If the rumors aren't lying, there should be a passage behind this rubble." Grom and the second soldier, a silent giant they called Scylla who hadn't uttered a word this whole time, began to clear the blockage. After a few minutes, they indeed found a narrow, dark opening leading somewhere down. A stale, musty air and cold wafted from the opening. "Well, Shram, your cue," the Cap smirked. "Ladies first, as they say, or rather, suicide mission stalkers." Shram understood he was being sent in first not out of courtesy. If there were traps or an ambush, he would take the hit. He switched on his headlamp and stepped into the darkness. The passage turned out to be a steep, crumbling staircase leading deep underground. The steps were slippery with dampness, and the air grew heavier and more unpleasant. Behind him, he could hear the heavy breathing of the storm heralds and the clang of their exoskeletons. The staircase led them to a long concrete tunnel, illuminated by sparse, dimly flickering emergency lamps. Thick cables and pipes, covered in rust and slime, ran along the walls. It was surprisingly quiet here. Not even the dripping from the ceiling could be heard. "Looks like it," said the Cap, his voice echoing hollowly in the confined space of the tunnel. "Where to next, expert?" Shram listened to his gut. Something about this tunnel felt wrong, a kind of unnatural silence. He took out his anomaly detector. It was silent, but that didn't reassure him. Some anomalies weren't registered by standard devices. "We need to go straight," he said. "There should be some kind of distribution hub or main hall." They had been walking down the tunnel for about 20 minutes when Shram noticed it. On the floor, in the light of his headlamp, were strange parallel scratches, as if something heavy had been dragged here. And these scratches were fresh. He stopped. "Hold it." "What now?" the Cap asked, annoyed. "Someone's been here, recently." Shram pointed to the scratches. "And they lead ahead." "Maybe some other adventurers," Grom suggested. "All the worse for them." But Shram didn't like that thought. The scratches were too even, too deep. They didn't look like the tracks of ordinary stalkers. They moved on, but now even more cautiously. Shram kept his hand on the hilt of his knife. His rifle was still unloaded. The storm heralds were also on alert, their weapons pointed forward. The tunnel ended at a massive steel door, like the airlock of a submarine. The door was ajar by a few centimeters. A faint light filtered from the crack, and a barely audible, monotonous hum could be heard. "Looks like we're here," said the Cap. "Scylla, check it out." The giant Scylla approached the door and carefully pushed it. The door opened slowly, with a creak. Beyond it was a huge, circular hall, bathed in bright, white light emanating from beneath a grated floor. In the center of the hall rose a complex structure of metal and glass, resembling some giant crystal or reactor core. That same monotonous hum emanated from this structure. But it wasn't this that caught Shram's attention. All over the hall, on the walls, on the ceiling, on the central structure were them. Dozens, if not hundreds, of strange biomechanical creatures, resembling a hybrid of insect and machine. Their bodies, covered in dark, shiny chitin, were dotted with wires, tubes, and some glowing elements. They moved slowly, methodically, as if performing some program, their numerous manipulator limbs repairing, connecting, or adjusting something on the central structure. "What in the are those things?" Grom breathed out, his voice trembling. Even these hardened soldiers in exoskeletons were stunned by the sight. "Is this the security system?" The Cap was clearly impressed, but there was also a thrill in his voice. "Interesting. Very interesting. Shram, do you know what these are?" Shram shook his head negatively. He had never seen anything like it. These creatures bore no resemblance to any known mutant in the zone. They looked as if they had been artificially created, or had arrived from somewhere else. "They don't see us," Scylla said quietly, speaking for the first time. And indeed, the creatures seemed completely absorbed in their work, paying no attention to the newcomers. "All the better for us," said the Cap. "We need to find the control panel for this thingamajig. It must be around here somewhere. Shram, your job is to figure out how to disable or bypass all this. Grom, Scylla, cover us, and be ready for anything." Shram understood that the situation was becoming increasingly dangerous. These biomechanical creatures didn't just look strange, they looked deadly, and he had no idea how to fight them if they did eventually notice them. He began to carefully scan the hall, looking for something like a control panel or terminal. The storm heralds moved behind him, trying not to make noise, but their exoskeletons still made a telltale clanking sound. Suddenly, one of the creatures, the one closest to them, stopped. It slowly turned its segmented head, crowned with several optical sensors in their direction. The sensors flashed red. And in that same instant, a deafening, high-frequency screech echoed throughout the hall. All the creatures froze, then, as if on command, turned towards the uninvited guests. Their manipulator limbs transformed, extending sharp blades, plasma cutters, and some kind of energy emitters. "Damn it," the Cap swore. "Looks like we've been spotted. To arms." The first creatures were already rushing at them, their movements swift and precise, despite their apparent clumsiness. Shram realized that the descent into the inferno had only just begun, and getting out of here alive would be much harder than he could have ever imagined. Part 3. Heart of the Machine. The hall had turned into hell. Flashes of gunfire illuminated the darting shadows of the biomechanical guards. The clang of metal, the roar of plasma cutters, the screech of damaged creatures had all blended into a deafening cacophony. The storm heralds, in their exoskeletons, were a formidable force, their heavy machine guns mowing down whole rows of the advancing enemies. But there were too many creatures. They swarmed from all sides, from the ceiling, from beneath the grated floor, their tactics coordinated and merciless. Shram, armed only with a knife and a few bolts he had managed to pick up, tried to stay behind the storm heralds, using them as cover. His rifle, taken by Grom, would have been very useful now, but asking for it back was pointless. He dodged attacks, leaped away from falling, sparking bodies of cybernetic creatures, and desperately scanned for anything that might give them a chance. Control panel, an emergency switch, anything. "Shram, for God's sake, do something!" the Cap roared, firing at another wave of attackers. His exoskeleton was already damaged in several places, smoke billowing from the breaches. "Find that damned console or we're all going to die here." Shram knew the Cap was right. They couldn't hold off this onslaught for long. He had to act fast. His gaze fell on the central structure, that heart of the machine, to which all these creatures were connected. If it controlled them, then perhaps it could be somehow disabled or overloaded. He dashed towards the structure, weaving between the combatants. One of the creatures blocked his path, its plasma cutter glinting dangerously. Shram threw a bolt at it, aiming for an optical sensor. The bolt hit its mark. The creature shrieked and thrashed about, swinging its cutter blindly. Shram slipped past. Reaching the base of the heart of the machine, he saw what he was looking for, a small panel recessed into the metal, with several buttons and a small screen. The screen glowed red, rapidly changing symbols flashing across it, resembling an unknown programming language. "Found it," he yelled to the Cap, "but I don't know what to press here." "Figure it out, quickly." The Cap barely managed to dodge a blow from a massive claw. Scylla, covering him, was already seriously wounded, his exoskeleton smoking, and he himself was breathing heavily. Grom was returning fire with his last reserves, but his ammunition was running out. Shram stared at the panel in desperation. The symbols on the screen were completely unfamiliar to him. He randomly pressed one of the buttons. Nothing. He pressed another. The hall plunged into darkness for a moment. Then the emergency lights flickered back on. The creatures froze for a second, then renewed their attack with fresh fury. "Not that one," Shram snarled to himself. He closed his eyes, trying to concentrate. Something about these symbols, their sequence, seemed familiar. He had seen something similar before. Where? And then it hit him. Old scientific reports he had once read at an abandoned military checkpoint. Reports about attempts to control anomalous fields using resonant frequencies. The symbols on the screen, they might not be a programming language, but a graphical representation of some kind of frequency diagrams. He looked at the panel again. One of the buttons was larger than the others and had an image of a sinusoid next to it. Emergency reset? Or a manual frequency calibration button? There was nothing to lose. He pressed the button hard and held it down. The screen went blank, then a single, slowly pulsating green line appeared. The monotonous hum emanating from the heart of the machine changed its pitch, becoming higher, clearer. And the creatures, they stopped, as if rooted to the spot. Their weapons retracted back into their manipulator limbs. Their optical sensors dimmed. They froze, like giant, lifeless statues. Silence. Deafening, almost painful after all the chaos. What did you do?" Grom, panting heavily, lowered his useless rifle. His face beneath his helmet was pale. I rebooted the system." Shram exhaled, not quite believing his own luck. "Or put them in standby mode." The Cap approached him, leaning against the wall. His exoskeleton was badly damaged. You saved us, Stalker. Didn't expect that from you." Shram shrugged. "I was saving my own skin. You just happened to be nearby." Scylla lay on the floor, his eyes closed. The Cap knelt beside him, checked his pulse. "Alive. But he's in bad shape. We need to get him out." "What about the bunker?" Grom asked, looking around at the frozen creatures. "That's what we came here for, wasn't it?" The Cap looked at the central structure, then at the control panel Shram had just used. "Looks like this was the main hub. No treasure-filled bunker here. This is some kind of control station or prison for these things. Or maybe both." He looked at Shram again. "You didn't just randomly find that button, did you? You understood something." Shram didn't go into details. "Just got lucky." "There's no such thing as just lucky in the zone." The Cap shook his head. "All right, forget it. We need to get out of here before these things wake up again. And get the Phantom. You still have it, Grom?" Grom nodded, patting the container on his belt. "Then let's move," the Cap commanded. "Shram, you're coming with us, to the perimeter. We'll decide what to do with you there. You might still be useful to us." Shram understood that his deal with the Storm Heralds wasn't over yet, but right now the main thing was to get out of this cursed place. They helped the wounded Scylla to his feet and, trying not to touch the frozen cyber guards, moved towards the exit of the hall. The monotonous hum of the heart of the machine had returned to its steady rhythm, but now there was a hidden threat in it, as if it were merely biding its time. The ash over the dead city continued to fall, but now it seemed to Shram not just radioactive fallout. It was like the ash of burnt hopes and shattered illusions, and he understood that the secret of this place was much deeper and more dangerous than he could have imagined. But that would be another story, if he managed to live to see it. Part 4. Rusty Dawn. The journey back through the tunnels felt like an eternity to Shram. The clang of the storm heralds damaged exoskeletons, the groans of the wounded Scylla, whom Grom and the Cap were dragging, and the oppressive silence, broken only by their heavy breathing, all of it created a somber atmosphere. Shram walked slightly ahead, lighting the way with his headlamp, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He replayed the events in the underground hall over and over in his mind. Those biomechanical creatures, the heart of the machine, the strange symbols on the panel. What was it? Someone's forgotten weapon, a failed experiment, or guardians of something even more ancient and incomprehensible, hidden beneath the dead city? He didn't ask the Cap any questions. The man was grim and focused on getting his group out. Shram understood now was not the time for curiosity. The main thing now was to get to the surface. When they finally emerged from the depths through the same passage in the old depot, Yanov greeted them with pre-dawn twilight. The ashen snow had stopped, but the sky remained low and gray. The air was cold and damp. "Rest stop," the Cap grunted briefly, lowering Scylla to the ground near one of the depot walls. Grom. Medkit. Shram. Scout around. No surprises. Shram nodded silently and moved off to the side, listening intently to the morning silence of the dead city. Apart from the distant cawing of crows and the howling of the wind in empty windows, nothing suspicious could be heard. It seemed their escape from the underground had gone unnoticed. Meanwhile, the Cap was tending to Scylla. His wounds were serious. The exoskeleton hadn't been able to fully protect him from the cyber creature's attacks. The Cap injected him with some kind of stimulant and bandaged the most dangerous injuries. "He'll make it," he finally said, getting up. "But we need to hurry. This hole will soon become popular with the local fauna again." He looked at Shram. "Well, guide, where to now? We need a way out of this damned city, and preferably the safest one." Shram considered the options. "There's an old road to the east, through the industrial zone. Lots of anomalies there, but usually no patrols. If we're lucky, we'll reach the swamps, and from there we can get to the cordon." "Doesn't sound very encouraging," Grom chuckled, checking his rifle. He only had a few magazines left, but better than crawling underground again. "Then lead the way," the Cap decided. "And remember, Shram, our deal still stands. You get us out, we let you go. Try to run or set us up, the conversation will be short." Shram said nothing. He simply turned and started walking, choosing what he deemed the safest path among the ruins and rubble. The path through the industrial zone proved to be a real ordeal. Carousels, electras, springboards, anomalies were at every turn. Shram had to use all his intuition and experience to guide the group through this deadly labyrinth. The anomaly detector beeped incessantly, forcing them to stop or change course frequently. The wounded Scylla significantly slowed them down, but the Cap and Grom stubbornly dragged him, not leaving him behind. Shram couldn't help but note this peculiar loyalty within the faction. Despite all their brutality, they didn't abandon their own. Several times they had to engage in brief skirmishes with mutants, a pack of eternally hungry blind dogs, a few zombified stalkers wandering through the ruins, muttering something incoherent. Shram, to whom the Cap had finally returned some ammunition, though not much, so he wouldn't relax, acted coolly and efficiently, covering the group. He understood that his life now directly depended on how useful he would be to the Storm Heralds. Finally, after several hours of grueling travel, they emerged from the industrial zone. Ahead, beyond a strip of sparse, stunted forest, the murky expanse of the swamps was visible. They were almost at their goal. "Rest stop," the Cap commanded again when they reached the edge of the forest. He sank heavily to the ground, removing his helmet. His face was tired and dirty, but his eyes burned with their familiar cold fire. "Looks like we made it out of this shithole. Thanks to you, Shram. You did your part." Grom also took off his helmet. His face was tense. He looked at Shram, then at the Cap. "So, what now, Cap? Do we let him go?" The Cap took out a flask, took a long swig, then he offered it to Shram. He didn't refuse. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but right now that seemed unimportant. "I keep my word," the Cap said, looking at Shram. "You're free. You can go. The Phantom stays with Usit was our prize from the start, but we saved your life. Consider it payment for the tour of the Inferno." Shram nodded. He hadn't expected otherwise. Taking the artifact from the 3-armed storm heralds would have been suicide. The main thing was she was free. "But let me tell you something, Shram," the Cap continued, his voice quieter, more serious. "What we saw down there, under Yanov, that's something new, something dangerous. My employers will be very interested in this information, and I think we'll be back to this dead city, so if you ever think of poking around there again, be careful. Very careful." He paused, then added, "And one more thing. If anyone asks you about what you saw down there, keep quiet. Some secrets of the zone are best left undisturbed, for your own good." Shram nodded again. He had no intention of telling anyone about those cyber creatures in the heart of the machine. Such knowledge could cost dearly. "Good luck to you, Stalker." The Cap held out his hand. Shram hesitated for a moment, then shook it. The handshake was firm. "You too," he said. He picked up his backpack, checked his rifle. Then, without looking back, he started walking towards the swamps. He walked, and the morning sun, finally breaking through the clouds, illuminated the rusty horizon. The ash over the dead city was left behind, but Shram knew he would feel its taste on his lips for a long time to come. And he knew that this trek had changed him. He had encountered something that went beyond the usual understanding of the zone. And that something was still down there, underground, biding its time. He didn't know what the next day would bring, but he was alive, and he was free. And for a stalker named Shram, that was the most important thing. He looked at the rising sun, and a faint, almost imperceptible smirk appeared on his face, bisected by the old scar. The zone had thrown him another challenge, and he was ready to accept it.